Great to have your company for what is very much an emergency edition of NBL Marketplace. This is where we look at NBL 25 and the free agency process, and we are getting very close to the start of this upcoming season. Here's one, though, that wasn't on our Monday morning bingo card. We have had our first coaching casualty of the NBL 25 season, and yes, that's right, the season hasn't actually started yet. I'm Jack Heverin. Olgun Uluc is the best newsbreaker in Australian basketball. Derek Rucker, one of the best analysts in the game. Welcome to both of you. Olgun, take us through this news.
All right, so this morning, the Adelaide 36ers management informed Scott Ninnis that he will no longer be the head coach of this team. The management then proceeded to inform the players that Scott Ninnis was out as head coach. Mike Wells, a longtime NBA assistant, very credentialed coach, he steps in as the head coach of this team. But this is a stretch of news that is surprising to everybody. This was a shock. I think the timing is the most shocking part of this. We thought that they signed Scott Ninnis to a 2-year deal after he had an impressive end to last season. We thought they'd at least give him a season and see what happened beyond that, but there was a sense that the writing was on the wall to an extent because of the nature of the credentials of the assistants that this team hired. But Scott Ninnis is out. The players are very much shocked right now. They're about to go into a practice, and the players aren't really sure if they should partake in it. There's a lot going on here, and man, Derek, this wasn't one that we saw coming, especially this early.
Olgun, you mentioned the players feel shocked and they're uncertain as to whether or not they want to train. I feel terrible. And, Scott Ninnis is someone who I played against, who I know. I don't know him well. I wouldn't say he's a close friend, but when you're around someone so much over the course of decades, you have an affinity for them. And last season, Jack, we got to spend time with Scott a little bit. And Olgun, as you said, I thought they did a really good job, him and Graham Cubank, of kind of rallying that team around and getting some wins down the back end of that season. I thought, it looked like he may be one of those coaches where you just purely have to judge whether he wins or loses games. Often we're so analytical about coaches. Do they do this? How are they schematically? Well, I think with Scott, we needed to be more macro in our assessment of him. And the bottom line was that he rallied the troops and he got them to win games. Go back 3 years almost to the day, Jack. The same plight was bestowed upon Connor Henry, who lost his job while up here coming out of quarantine in Brisbane. I don't know what happens at this time of the year, but this is really just, it rips the guts out of your team and the soul of what you're trying to do in the lead up to your preseason.
Let me just share a statement from the Adelaide 36ers, which has been issued a short time ago. For full disclosure, we're recording a little before 11 o'clock on Monday morning with this news fresh. The statement reads, club management met with Scott Ninnis this morning to inform him he has been released from his role as the head coach of the Adelaide 36ers with immediate effect. Mike Wells has subsequently been appointed as Adelaide 36ers head coach for NBL 25. We'll get to Mike Wells shortly. The club will make a full statement in due course, including potentially a new role within the club for Ninnis. Olgun, it's the timing. That's the thing that I think a lot of people, players included and probably Scott included as well, are going to struggle to wrap their head around this morning.
So from what I was told, over the off-season and throughout the start of this preseason, the 36ers ownership and management, they've come to the conclusion, essentially, that they don't feel as though Scott Ninnis is up to the job from a capacity standpoint. They don't feel as though he is capable as some of the other options that are in front of them. The other sense I got was that they don't feel as though he put the requisite effort into recruitment, into putting miles into this team from a coaching standpoint going into the preseason. That's how the front office feels. Now, the other part of this is throughout this offseason, once they signed Scott Ninnis, they also signed Dejan Vasiljevic to a new 3-year deal. They signed Isaac Humphries to a new 3-year deal as well. And so these are two players who signed multi-year deals with the assumption that Scott Ninnis would be their head coach for at least two of them. The timing of it, as you mentioned, we mentioned earlier Mike Wells and Marko Marinovic, two highly credentialed assistant coaches who this team has invested a lot of money into. There was an expectation that Scott Ninnis wasn't proven enough. He finished the end of last season, but my expectation was that they would give him this season, right? Or they would give him the majority of this season. And if things didn't go well, then the backup plan was there in either Wells or Marinkovic, right? Or Marinovic. They didn't give him that grace, right? They figured instead of getting into this a potential 2-6 hole to start the season and then moving on, they figured instead that they would anticipate such a start and just go right ahead and put Wells in. And there is a question now of, was Wells brought in to be the head coach? Was this a sort of a backroom deal anyway? There is an argument to say yes, and there's an argument to say that over the months, they realized that Scott Ninnis wasn't the person who they thought he'd be from a coaching standpoint, and they wanted to move on ASAP.
This is really tough because I'm not even in preseason mode, Jack, from an analysis point of view, and we're getting hit with mid-season conduct right here by the Adelaide 36ers. And Olgun, I'll tell you right now, the 36ers do not give a damn about timing. As I mentioned before, they let Connor Henry go before the eve of the season a few years ago. They let CJ Bruton go before the Christmas holiday season. They do not care about when they do stuff. Now, some of their moves in the past have been proven to have been the incorrect moves. Perhaps this move is a result of them learning from past mistakes and them now trying to get it right and saying, you know what? Whatever is inevitable, it's better to do it sooner rather than later. If they felt that Ninnis wasn't the guy, which I don't know how they could have made that judgment. Maybe they saw some things that we're not privy to. But surely, Olgun, the whole roster isn't even there yet. Is the whole roster assembled in Adelaide yet? And if it has been assembled, it couldn't have been there that long for them to be able to break this down. I don't know. I could be totally wrong, and they could have gotten this 100% correct, but my eyebrows are raised.
So the whole roster is not there yet. Some of the imports are not there, but the bulk of the local group is there. And like I said, they were informed in a meeting this morning, and they're in a state of shock, effectively. They have a practice this morning. They don't know whether to take part in it. There were some who have some loyalty to Scott Ninnis, as you would with any head coach. And there were some who figured they have to just roll with the punches now. But where this is becoming a trend for the 36ers. And the hope is that this is a trend of a different light, in that this is a decision that was made based on a lot of thought and debate within the organization. We've seen in the past, Jamal Franklin was released from this team after one game at the NBL Blitz last season. Craig Randall was a mid-season release because of some intel that this team should have done and didn't do. Now there's new management with Matt Weston at the top, and the hope is that he's putting in the requisite effort into the intel into every part of this business.
Olgun, can you clarify for me? Because I've been wondering, with all the moving pieces in that Adelaide front office, what is the structure? Who is on top of who? Because I'm quite confused how that all lays out. Is it basketball and business, or is it just all mumble jumble and guys are kind of jockeying for authority?
Matt Weston is the basketball decision maker in that team. There is obviously a crossover to an extent with the business side, but that is largely Nick Barbato who handles that, with obviously Grant Kelly as the owner. But these are decisions that are ostensibly made by Matt Weston, using his experience in the basketball world. And this is a change for the 36ers, who have, for the past few seasons, been making basketball decisions with no basketball people in those decision-making positions, right? So Matt Weston is a change of a kind. And so the hope is that basketball experience is something that will ultimately make these decisions make a lot more sense.
Hey, Jack, now we know that Brian Goorjian was close to signing down there. Now, you talk about fumbling. You don't sign Goorjian and go with Ninnis, and then a few months later you decide you don't want Ninnis?
Yeah, so let me pose this to both of you. And I say this without an ounce of disrespect to Scott, because I think what shouldn't be lost in all of this is that when Adelaide were in tatters after the CJ Bruton departure, Scott unified the group, got them all on the same page, got them winning some games, and got fans back to the Adelaide Entertainment Centre. So that shouldn't be lost. But Scott was given the main job. And then there were rumours at that stage that they were looking for a senior assistant. Brendan Joyce's name was thrown around as someone who they were talking to, and understanding is that talks got quite advanced there. Now they go down the Mike Wells and Marinkovic path. So the question to both of you, just coming from one side of the argument, is were they ever fully sold on Scott in the first place?
Olgun, I don't think you can operate with that type of undermining going on effectively as a head coach. If it was me, I'd be like, hey, those guys, I don't need them. Okay, I think I can handle this. Let me build out my the core of my assistant coaching roster. If you want to bring one guy in, but just to fully assemble my coaching staff for me, that doesn't sit well with me. But again, I wish I had the opportunity to be inside and see how Ninnis actually gets down in training and what he's like as a coach. And probably the most damning thing you've said so far with respect to Scott is the effort-based stuff. If he wasn't putting the effort in, then that's certainly a trigger point.
That's a pretty hefty accusation.
That's part of the reasoning from the 36ers management. The bulk of it, though, was what they feel is Ninnis' capacity as a basketball coach. And Jack, your point makes a lot of sense, right? They signed Ninnis, they re-signed him as head coach, and they immediately went to bring in a high-level assistant, whether that was a Brendan Joyce or a Judd Flavel, and then it ended up being a Mike Wells. The idea was there wasn't complete trust in Ninnis' capacity as a head coach. And so they had to bring in these other basketball minds to supplement it. That's how the team felt from the very beginning. And you could then argue that is a pathway that was never going to succeed. If you don't have full trust in the capacity of your head coach, you signaled from the very beginning that you wanted to put what are ostensibly more credentialed, better basketball minds around him. The writing was on the wall at that point. And again, I think we all thought that Ninnis would be given a year, maybe a season, and then maybe the first few games of a following season. But that wasn't to be, and it was basically this team has just made the decision that was brewing in their minds from the very beginning, from the moment they even signed Scott Ninnis.
So at this stage, as I say, as we record, it's a little before 11 o'clock on Monday morning at Melbourne time. We haven't heard from the club as yet, other than the statement. They have said that they will communicate in due course, and we'll give them the right to do so when that happens. But just before we started recording, jumped on, had a very quick look at some of the comments already under the Adelaide 36ers social media post. NBL have also posted some stuff as well around this, and it's not great. How does the Adelaide 36ers handle the next 24 hours from a fan perspective?
Well, PR is so important. I mean, remember the debacle last year when they complained about travel? It's seemingly always something, and they touch on all points. You know, you got to give it to Adelaide. They know how to entertain and keep the content up for us and give us every opportunity to get after it. But they're going to have to deal with this, Olgun. And more importantly, Scott Ninnis is a piece of South Australian basketball history. You know, he's the chair in the corner of the room that's been there a long time and has seen a lot of basketball, and he's seen it all come and go. And his crew down there spreads quite vast, and it's a lot of South Australian basketball luminaries. So they've got to deal with that aspect of it also. Furthermore, from a financial point of view, Olgun, how much money are they paying in payouts to former coaches now?
And they've been paying more than one head coach for the past few seasons. There was a point where I think they were paying 3 head coaches. The point you make about I'll call it the Adelaide in-group, right? Which is the reason why Ninnis was given such a push to remain as head coach, and it was a reason why Brian Goorjian pulled his name out of the head coaching search in Adelaide. It was because there is a group of people in Adelaide, former players, media members, things like that, who push in the background and do have a say in the media space when it comes to who they want in different positions, right? And this was a chance for the Adelaide kid in Scott Ninnis to be the head coach, and this sort of fulfilled what a lot of those people wanted. Now, this is obviously not going to make them very happy. Mm-hmm. And so there is no escaping that this will be a largely negative news cycle, and the only thing that can really remedy this is winning. And so this team has to put its head down. Its management has to put its head down. There's no talking yourself around this. There's no convincing people within the Adelaide community that this was a good decision. I think their minds are already made up. The only way to remedy that is to win games. That's the only way you're going to justify this decision.
And the problem for them with that, Derek, is that they don't get to do that for another 6 weeks, basically. They're going to have 6 weeks of this. And the other thing that is interesting to try and wrap your head around to some extent is that a lot of the, I guess, marketing or the discussion out of the club since Scott Ninnis signed is that we want to get back to our South Australian roots. We've gone and got Ben Christie. We've got Jacob Rigoni. We've got Lat Mayen back. Yes, we've made some mistakes in the past with missing out on Lockie Olbrick and having Jack McVeigh and Isaac White, but here's the way forward. And then before the season's even started, we take out the South Australian-born coach.
Well, Jack, they've got to win preseason games right away. They can't be trying to figure out like this rotation. Now, we often talk about teams working on schemes and so forth. Adelaide must win preseason games right away. If they lose a couple of games early in that preseason, Olgun, and they look less than the league average, the pressure down there in South Australia is a real bubble of basketball down there. And it probably doesn't get acknowledged or recognized how some of the things that you alluded to with that Adelaide in-group, how that operates and the power. So the pressure will mount significantly on that new coaching staff if they don't look promising in the preseason. And another thing, Olgun, you know my philosophy on bringing in some of these coaches who don't have a lot of experience with the NBL. It's one thing to watch the NBL on TV and be like, I know that coach. Oh, the commentators are speaking English. Oh, it's written in English on the court. Everything looks familiar until you get to our league, Olgun, and you realize it is significantly different than anything you experience in the NCAA. It's different to the NBA. It is a very different hybrid type of league, which a lot of, especially American coaches, have not been able to acclimatize to.
So here would be the pushback on that, in that you have, let's talk about the talent first, in Kendrick Davis, in Dejan Vasiljevic, in Isaac Humphries, in Jarrell Martin. That is a really impressive core four, and you add Lat Mayen and Jason Kadee and Sunday Dech. Do I think that the depth is lacking? Yes. But the high-end talent is really good.
Yep.
When it comes to the coaching and who's now taking over, Mike Wells, yes, he has a ton of NBA experience, but he has a lot of Team USA experience as well. So he has a lot of those runs on the board coaching the FIBA game. Their assistant coach, Marko Marinovic, just won a bronze medal with the Serbian national team as an assistant coach. And so there are a ton of repetitions when it comes to coaching in the FIBA game on this coaching staff. And these are primarily like highly credentialed people in Wells and Marinovic. And so when you look at it in a vacuum and put aside how erratic this 36ers team has been over the past 5-6 years when it comes to decision-making and players and coaches in and out, in a vacuum, if you look at that roster and that coaching staff, it is an upgrade in the coaching staff. That has to be said. Mike Wells is a way more credentialed coach than Scott Ninnis is. And so is, I think most people would say, so is Marko Marinovic. And the playing roster is also really impressive, at least from the top end. Again, the depth I have questions about. But in a vacuum, there is a world, and I think it's reasonable to say that this team may have gotten better.
Well, I always felt, Jack, based on what we saw from their performance at the end of last season at home, I felt, Olgun, if they could win 8 to 9 games at home and then go kind of 40%-ish on the road, they give themselves a chance to get in the play-in. And I like the pillars that they have in Vasiljevic and obviously Humphries. Having those two strong locals is a very good start. So it's not like I don't think that they're capable of causing problems this season. I just worry about what this unrest does to the playing group in terms of its faith in the organization.
And I wanted to ask you about that, Derek, from a player's perspective. They have learnt this morning, and it's all come together very, very quickly. What would be going through their minds right now, particularly, as Olgun pointed out, for your top-level players like a DJ Vasiljevic and Isaac Humphries, who have re-signed with the team on the basis that Scott Ninnis will be coaching?
Well, I'm sure the emotions are not uniform throughout the playing group. It's impossible for it to be. But for those that enjoyed playing for Scott Ninnis and believed in him, this is going to be a kick in the guts. And they're going to be trying to figure out, okay, how do I process what I'm feeling and still try and get on with my job as a professional? Now, we all get over it, but it's going to take different amounts of time for varying players. But it's also, how do you relate to the new coach? There's always going to be someone, Olgun, who suggests there was some backstabbing, no matter how clean a cut this was. There's always going to be that type of innuendo from somewhere. And those are the types of things that are always dangerous in these situations. But I think there's probably enough leadership in that group. Now it's on Humphreys, it's on Kadee, it's on Vasiljevic, it's on Sunday Deck to kind of rally that group and understand, hey, this is what it is. We've got to go forward. We've got to get to work. And we have enough, as we've mentioned here, there's enough talent there to make this season somewhat special.
The stability part of this is going to be, I think, the most important part. From a basketball perspective, they may succeed, they may fail, right? There are reasons to believe either side of that. The important thing now is that when Ninnis was re-signed, the idea was this is the turning of a page of this 36ers organization, where they finally had a really solid end of a season, and the hope was that they're going into more stable times, and this is an organization that functions really well, right? You have all these guys you got to think of DJ Vasiljevic came from the Sydney Kings, right? Isaac Humphreys has played in the NBA. He came from University of Kentucky. These are guys who have been, Jarrell Martin's about to coming from the Sydney Kings as well. These are guys who have been part of really well-functioning organizations, and it looked like the 36ers were about to start to turn a new leaf and start a new era of being a functional organization for the first time in 6 years. Now it appears as though, at least on the face, that that's not the case anymore, right? It very well could be, but the priority for this management now and for these decision makers is to continue to build the chemistry with the players, to continue to foster stability, right? This is a decision that has upset some people naturally. And so whatever the basketball outcomes are here, the priority for these decision makers is to make sure that these players know that this is a stable organization, because on its face, it doesn't appear that way.
To wrap up, Olgun, do we know when we're expecting any sort of public press conference or similar from the 36ers?
I haven't got word of that. There is a lot of tension within all of the people involved in this, and so I would be surprised if it happens today or tomorrow. There might need to be a little bit of breathing room before we get that. From what I understand, Ninnis, the role that they may offer him is sort of an academy role, something on the periphery of the organization.
What?
But
he's gone from a head coach to head of junior development. Come on, man. I'd be like, hey, take that job and you know what with it.
and so look, we have no word yet on the timings of those things. But look, this came as a shock to everybody, and so my hope is that this. Actually, I don't know if it's my hope. I was thinking it'd be nice if this was the last sort of bit of drama out of Adelaide, but it's really nice to come together with you guys and do these shows. So I don't know.
Yeah, I'm with you, Derek. I think Scotty's going to go back and run his wine tour business, to be honest. I'm not sure he's taking any sort of academy jobs.
He's still got the car, just so you know. He drove the car in and out, so he's still got the wine business car.
It's something that we should all do when we get over to Adelaide this season as well. Well, didn't think we'd be coming together on Monday, the 12th of August, to talk about our first coaching casualty of the NBL 25 season, but we're here now. What happens next in the next 24, 48, 72 hours is going to be very fascinating from an Adelaide point of view. What I do know, and what we do know, is that the initial outrage from fans is very real, and there's got to be a bit of work to do from the Adelaide 36ers. Derek, Olgun, as always, thank you for coming together at very, very short notice. We'll watch on and see what happens next.